So we'd like to introduce the 5,000 property millionaires from last year's conference, Geoff and Janine Masters. Now you might be familiar with the story. Now Geoff was, he'll probably tell you himself. He's from a lot of middle-aged people's past. So, and had the sport as one of his main careers, and also that he was being able to dedicate a lot of his time to. So we're just going to get Geoff and Janine up to give you their story. And anyone who's got their story that they'd like to tell, we'd love to hear it. So everybody has their own story, they have their own journey. So please share it with the rest of us. Thanks, Geoff and Janine.
Hi everybody, Geoff and Janine Masters. What a great presentation it was before lunch from Kevin, because I think we can all relate to all the things we wish we'd done at the outset, and I guess and we'll be like you, we didn't do all the mistakes that I certainly made before I got to the point of finding the property club. If I can just go back a little bit and say, I think no matter what job you're in, and for me, I was a professional tennis player. That's how I started my life, my career as a professional tennis player. And at some stage, whether you're a professional tennis player or whatever business you're in, there's probably a seminal moment that hits you about what sort of impact something specific will have on your life. So I'm just going to talk about that for a second. And for me, it was as a young man playing at Wimbledon, very early 20s, and the great players in my year were people like John McEnroe and Jimmy Connors, Bjorn Borg. Of course, Bjorn Borg goes on to win 5 Wimbledon titles. But I'm at Wimbledon 1 year as a young man, and I've played a match at Wimbledon. I'm in the Wimbledon locker room, and I'm watching on the screen Bjorn Borg, who's now a 16-year-old, and he's already got a great name for himself. He's played Davis Cup for Sweden as a 15-year-old. He's had great wins. He's a star, and he's come to Wimbledon with great expectations. And I'm watching on the screen of the monitor in the Wimbledon locker room, and he's losing to this British player who was quite expert on grass court play, and Bjorn's losing. In the end, he does lose, quite an upset. So he comes into the locker room, and he's obviously disappointed, he's upset, and coming in later is just immediately afterward is his coach. His name was Leonard Berglund, who was his coach. It was his mentor. He was an older man who'd been a former Davis Cup player for Sweden. And he said, Bjorn, I see you're really quite disappointed, upset. And he said, of course I'm upset, I've lost. And he said, what about that umpire? He said, he's made at least 5 or 6 really bad calls throughout this match. It's cost me the match. And Leonard, who's older and wiser, is a mentor, and we'll talk about mentors a bit later. He said, so Bjorn, he said, the umpire's made 5 or 6 mistakes. Of course, this is before we had Hawkeye, etc. It was just the umpire making all the calls. And Bjorn said, yes, he's cost me the match. So Leonard said, well, Bjorn, in the match, how many mistakes did you make? 30? 40? Yeah, probably. So he said, what you're saying is that the 30 or 40 mistakes cost you the match, or was it the umpire that cost you the match? Who made 5 or 6? And Bjorn got the message, and I got the message. It's about taking responsibility. It's about taking ownership. And when you're in professional sport, you can blame all and sundry, but at the end of the day, unless you take ownership, learn the lesson, and decide how you're going to fix it, and what you're going to do to go forward, it's not going to happen. So that's basically the message that I took then, and have basically tried to stick with the rest of my life, and certainly with Janine, the same thing. Take ownership. Whether it's your job or whether it's investing, you've got to take ownership. So to hark back now to my and then our investment journey, probably like all of you, I made my first purchase as a property investor when I was around about 22. I've been playing professionally for about 3 years. It was a struggle, started to make just a little bit of money, decided property investing was a good way to go. Didn't have enough money to buy something myself, so I had 3 mates that were tennis players. And between the 4 of us, we decided we'd pull some money, buy a little property. Where are we going to invest? Someone said, how about the Gold Coast? Yeah, good idea. We'll all meet in the Gold Coast, buy something. Not doing not doing anything other than probably what a lot of people have done. Sounds a good idea. We meet on the Gold Coast. What do we do now? Anyone know a real estate agent? Yeah, I think I do. Right, go and ask a real estate agent. This is how much money we've got. What can we do? So he took us to a little place just over the border from Gold Coast into Tweed Heads, because that's all we could afford. And he showed us. We said, yeah, that looks okay. Let's do it. So we've given him the money. And we bought this little place, and then we're off on the road again, playing and travelling. And of course, it's no due diligence. It's just us being kids, trusting in something, put our money in, don't know what we're doing, hopefully it'll go up. And of course, to be fair to him, I think he was a good bloke, the real estate agent. He did all the right things, but what happens is about 18 months later, of course, of the four of us, one wants the money out, can't afford it, wants to do something else. The other three, we can't buy that person out, so we've got to sell. So we've gone into this little business, four of us. We've had buying costs, didn't know what we were buying. We've had selling costs. It was a lesson. Need to take ownership. Got to learn the lesson. So we did learn a lesson. Subsequently, we move on a little bit more, and I've had a couple of decisions that I made after that worked out okay. Probably lucky, because I was playing a fair bit in the United States. I bought a property in Southern California at the time because it suited my regime as far as where I could live to practice and train. Worked out okay. I bought another block of land on the Gold Coast some stage later that did okay as well at Paradise Waters. For those of you who know the Gold Coast, I paid $60,000 for a block of land in 1975. It was a fortune. Finished up selling it for $150 about 5 years later. Lucky. But it whetted my appetite. So what I'm saying is, along the way, these three little investments along the way, it was all done out of pot luck, take a chance, don't know what you're doing, no planning, etc. Maybe about 10 or 15 years later, when I'm married, got 3 kids, like so many of us here, we're working hard, we're head down, bum up, paying for school fees, etc. No time to do due diligence. And again, I decided I've had some good and bad situations with property. I want to buy some more property. Living on the Gold Coast, knew the area, I thought, and like so many of us, that's what we tend to do. Know the area, we'll buy in the area. So I looked around for a little while, read the papers, bought a property in Ashmore. Principal and interest loan, wasn't a new property. Block of land was a bit big, probably not ideal for an investor. It had a retaining wall that tended to be slipping. All mistakes. And of course, after about 6 or 7 years, it went nowhere. I sold it, lost money, etc. So the journey is probably so typical with so many people here. That's what I did. Sometimes I got lucky, sometimes I didn't. So about another 7 or 8 years after that, my kids are now starting to grow up, starting to leave home. I've got one still left at home, and I decided I've got to do something seriously here. Property's a good way to go. What'll I do? I looked online. This was 1999. I looked online. I saw what was then called the Investors Club. Looking at it all, I'm thinking, this looks really good. This is somebody that's doing the due diligence for me. That's what I want. I want the expertise. I need a mentor. I need someone who's going to help me. So I went to my first meeting on the Gold Coast at Southport. Kevin came along, presented. Not very impressively either, by the way. Still doesn't look very impressive. But I was interested. And like so many people, I'm sure, I didn't want to jump in quickly. I was worried about fly-by-nighters. The Gold Coast was full of fly-by-nighters over many years. So I went to 3 more meetings before I thought, this is for real. And I jumped in pretty quickly, bought about 4 properties in the space of about 3 years, which was a great thing to do, and delighted with everything that happened. Unfortunately then I became divorced, so got a real slowdown. The good news is I met somebody else. So we then became involved after I had a bit of a hiatus from the club for some time, bought a couple of more properties through the club. We've bought 6 properties in all through the club. Janine's a great supporter as far as property is concerned. She's a former property manager, real estate agent, so we've gotten back engaged with the club, which has been fantastic. We became the 5,000th property millionaires last year. Went to Norfolk Island to go to the international conference, which was just sensational. Can't recommend that highly enough. So now we've got someone involved who become property mentors, which is fantastic. So I guess what I'm saying to you here is we have to take ownership. You know, our future is our responsibility. Our retirement is our responsibility. If it's to be, it's up to me, is the quote that I've stayed with. If it's to be, it's up to me. It's not up to somebody else, it's up to me. We've all got to embrace that. And I think there was a quote up earlier that maybe Kevin or Troy put up about we're not born winners or losers, we can be choosers. So we've got to choose to take ownership, take responsibility. So I think ultimately, with all the mistakes that I certainly made along the way, we've now come to the point that with the club's support, there's no guarantees in anything, is there, in life? No guarantees whatsoever, but this club will give you every opportunity to have the best chance of success. You've got your mentor that we've now become. We've had all this experience. I've been invested with the club for 16 years. Janine's had all this experience as well. We're still developing more experience by coming to these sort of conferences. So my journey's been interesting. Our journey's been interesting. The club has been fantastic. And I think those of you that are here are so wise to be here, because this is where it's all happening if you're interested in your future and taking ownership of what you do. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.